Moment. We're going to try and recap on the main points, and my colleague Mike Hanna has been taking a look at the Baker report, the 79 different recommendations. Mike, what are the headlines?
Well, essentially what the headlines are is some radical suggestions from the study group concerning the various issues. The one is within Iraq. The first 36 pages of the report deal with the situation at present. They deal with the question of U.S. forces, a gradual reduction of forces, a transference of responsibility to the Iraqi security forces. But the real leap forward within this report is actually looking at the totality of the problem, of moving into a public debate within the United States, a linkage that the administration of President Bush has avoided throughout his term in office. And that linkage, putting the question of resolving, creating stability in Iraq, along with creating a wider stability in the region, is something that this report is attempting to push forward and attempting to look at all the conflicts within the region as part of the way to achieve stability in Iraq. The other issue that is absolutely central is that the study group says repeatedly that this is in American national interest. It is, as a way, it is attempting to leap over any objections that President Bush might have by making clear that this is not only a resolution of the problem in Iraq that's at stake, it's the very question of U.S. power within the Middle East. It is, says this study group, in the U.S.'s political national interests to achieve stability in Iraq. To do that, the U.S. has got to play its role in achieving stability in Lebanon, in Israel, Palestine. It's got to address all these issues before it can even attempt to bring any form of stability whatsoever to Iraq. So it is, in a way, David, a leap forward in thinking within the United States. It is a philosophy that the president has been opposed to, and now it has been thrown open to the public to debate, and let us see what kind of pressure comes to bear on a U.S. administration that has been fundamentally opposed to this basic philosophy.
Thanks for that summary, Mike Hanna. Thank you very much indeed. It was time for a new way forward, a new approach, according to the report's authors. And they also said that the war has badly divided America as a country, set one person against another, one party against another. Let's take a look at it from a military perspective and talk to Josh Rushing, our military analyst who's in Washington for us. Not very long ago, Josh, you were serving alongside some of the people who are in Iraq right now. From your contacts with those people who are still involved in trying to sort this situation out, what is the morale of the military?
Well, the morale for the last several months has been a bit of kind of wait and see. Everyone's kind of hunkered down over in Iraq and in the Pentagon as much as possible because they know with the change of the midterm elections, with the change of Rumsfeld and his job, and now with the new reports, not just this report, but the White House's study and General Pace's study to come out soon, that they may be taking a different direction. They certainly will be taking a different direction very soon. It's just no one knows what that direction is until the president makes up his mind which new direction he wants to go.
Are the forces on the ground finding it very hard to train the Iraqis to a reasonable standard? And if so, why?
Yes and no. They're training them fine. It's what they do once they get out into the field that matters. So it was a case in Fallujah where the Iraqi forces retreated before the battle began. So they haven't had a lot of confidence in them. But at this point, they're saying that the U.S. military can't solve this problem. It's got to be the Iraqis, to include the Iraqi military, like it or not. So they've got to pull the U.S. military back. I think one of the biggest things about the report is the U.S. has gone for the last several years, at least 4 years, in kind of a myopically militaristic way, very unilateral approach to the world. This report deals with the diplomacy first. It says others have got to be involved. Military is further down the list. So I think the military will see, great, we're not the only solution that the entire government's going to bring all it has to bear to this problem and try to resolve it through ways other than just the Department of Defense.
Why hasn't the U.S. military been able to impose itself more on a solution then?
Well, I think one thing is they never took enough troops. And I think almost everyone who knows anything about this situation is admitting that now, that they took enough troops for phase one to get to Baghdad, but not enough troops to provide the kind of security and stability the country needed back in '03 to have any type of economic hope. What they've done instead is Rumsfeld's approach of trickling out all our troop strength over 4 years. So now as the report said today, we don't have more troops to put in anymore. We could have in the beginning, but now guys are going on their 4th or 5th combat tour. They just don't have more troops to put there. So I think there were never enough troops on the ground, and that's a big part of why the U.S. military hasn't been able to impose its will in trying to turn this problem around.
Captain Frank Pasquale, very good of you to stay with us from CENTCOM. What do you make of Josh Rushing's comments there, himself a former military man not very long ago, that not enough troops were put in the first place?
I think most of the commanders at the time felt that they had what they needed, and I think what's happened here, and I think sometimes we forget that the nature of the threat here has changed a number of different times. Initially, when we went through, we were talking about operations against the Iraqi army as it existed. And then with the growth of terrorism, the movement of Al-Qaeda into the area, and then ultimately where we were after the Samarra bombing last year, earlier this year, excuse me, we saw another facet of this conflict emerge, and that was sectarian violence. The threat has changed continuously. So it's not the same static threat that you might have seen, or the same static set of circumstances that we've been dealing with all along. It has changed a number of different times. So sometimes looking back on it, we forget some of those circumstances, but I think that's an important concept to keep in mind.
Big holiday season approaching for your guys. We've talked about morale, Christmas just coming up. Will they be relieved to hear that, although there hasn't been a timetable officially laid out, there is a plan put forward by some very respected Democrats and Republicans, which a lot of people are saying the President of the United States would do well to adhere to?
Well, I think it's a lot more complex than that. I mean, let's face it, this is a report, and it is done by a group of very, very distinguished Americans who have contributed a great deal. The President went to great pains today to make sure that everybody understood how important he felt this was, and that we are going to take this very, very seriously at the highest levels of government. They're going to be talking to Congress today as well, and that's very important. But at the same time, the Pentagon is working on a report, National Security Council is working on their findings, as is General Casey. So what we're looking at here is a great deal of our government involved in taking a very, very close look at what exactly the circumstances are and what it is we need to do. So if I'm on the ground, I know that the very senior people in my command and in my government, in my military, are all working in my best interest, but also, and very important, because if you talk to the troops on the ground, one of the most important things that they will tell you is they are fighting for the Iraqi people, and that's a very, very important thing to keep in mind. And they believe in that mission.
Captain, give me an idea, if you can, of not how the political situation has changed, and you talk about the Iraqi resistance, you talk about the arrival of Al-Qaeda and the different circumstances that they present, but how has it changed on a daily basis for your troops? How much more difficult is it?
I think the nature of the threat has changed over the course of time. Now we see other elements as well. One of the things I was also alluding to earlier was the growth also of militias, and that's something that is a big concern. Obviously, that's a violation of their own constitution, and it's something that the government has to deal with. Because within the government itself, there is no room for alternate means or alternate groups governing spaces within the country. So that is obviously another threat, because what it does is it continues to foment more and more of the sectarian view of the country, which formerly was not a sectarian place. It was very secular over the course of much of its history. And as a result, that continues to up the ante here in terms of what the security situation is.
Very much appreciate your time, Captain Frank Pasquale from US CENTCOM, Central Command. Let's bring in once again Fareed Sabri Hassan from the Iraqi Islamic Party, listening to this from London. Captain Pasquale there outlining the way that the threat has changed over the last 44 months. Why was that, if you like, allowed to happen? Why did that happen?
Well, it happened because of series of American mistakes. The Americans in Iraq considered security as the only option to solve the problems in Iraq, and that the violence has spiraled out because of this. You see, the American army became in Iraq like another tribes of the Iraqi society. When you revenge on, when you kill from people, people will revenge on you, and that's what happened. And the cycle of violence continued without solution, without a political solution. Even the political solution in Iraq was not really made for Iraqis. It was made for the public relations, for the American government, and this was a big problem. We saw the strength of the militias has been increased. The strength of Iran and Syria and Iraq has been increased because the Americans have concentrated their power on fighting the resistance while leaving the militias and leaving other parties which has got no democratic democratic background in order to take power in Iraq, and that's what happened.